All right, welcome back. In this video, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the different types of events. So far, we've encountered the click event and the change event that we used on a text input or a number input in the Scorekeeper app. I'm going to start by introducing the MDN event reference. So that's the web page I'm on right here. And this web page is a reference to all of the different events that are recognized by the DOM API. And if we scroll down, you might be surprised at just how many there are. And I'm actually going to have you, in the next exercise, write some code just to count how many there are. It's a fun, practical example of using the JavaScript console. So you're going to count how many there are. But for now, just know that there are a ton of them. And there are probably 5, 6, maybe up to 10 really common ones that we'll use all the time. Things like for drag and drop, for hovering events, click events, maybe double clicks, key press events. But otherwise, a lot of the more obscure ones we'll never use, or maybe you'll use them one time in a project. But it's good to know that this web page exists and that there are so many events that we may never even use. In this video, I'm going to focus on 2 events in particular that have to do with hovering. So hovering over an element with your mouse. And those are called mouse over and mouse out. So I have a simple application that I'm going to make. It's called todo.html, my new file. And I'm just going to add my regular boilerplate. And this isn't going to be a complete to-do list. We won't be able to add new to-dos. All that we're going to do is have a UL with 3 or 4 LIs. Things like wash cat, feed cat, and we'll do feed cat to dog and save. So we have our 3 to-dos, and that's all we need for now. And what I want to do, I'm going to open this up in the browser. I want to be able to click, and that should gray out the to-do item or maybe strike through it, put a line through it. But I also want to be able to hover, and I want to know which one I'm hovering over. So I get this nice user feedback. As I hover over one of these, maybe we'll have it change color or bold. We'll start by just making it green. And there are so many nice effects you can do for your user using these hover events. So I'll show that right now. Before we can actually write any JavaScript though, we need to make our file. So I'm going to save a new file and I'll call it todos.js. And as always, I add my alert, connected, save, go back here, and add in our script at the bottom. And our source is equal to todos.js. And we'll save. Refresh, and we get our alert. That means it's working. Let's go add that first event that I mentioned. And the first thing we need to do is select something before we can manipulate. So I'm going to start by just doing it to the first li. So I'm going to use var first li equals document, and I'll do query selector li, and remember this gives me the first li because I didn't do query selector all. And then I'm going to add my event listener to first li. So we want first li.add event listener, and the event that we're listening for is not click, it's mouse over. And then we give our callback function, and the way that mouse over works, it's going to fire as soon as we start hovering over something. So if I was working with this last li, my mouse over would fire right now, and right now on this second one, and right now on this first one. So it's about when the hover starts. So first li.add event listener mouse over, and we'll just do a console.log instead of our callback, mouse over. And if we refresh, open up our console, remember we only did it to the first li, and there we go, we get a mouse over. Also, it's important to notice it's not continually firing every single time that we're over this. It's when our hover over an element actually begins. So that's useful so that we're not constantly console.logging or whatever the code is that we have in the callback. It only happens when we mouse over initially. So rather than just console.logging, let's work on changing the color of the li. Let's make it green. So when you hover over, it turns green. So we need to do first li.style.color equals green. And we save, refresh, and now watch, I'll make it a little bigger. Whoops, I'll make this a little bigger here and refresh. As I start my mouse over, it turns green. And then when I go away, it stays green, which is not what we want. We just want this to be a hover effect. So when I hover over the li, it turns green, but when I stop, it goes back to being black. To do that, we actually need another event, and that event will fire when our hover is over. So when we leave this element, and it's called mouse out. So we're going to do the same thing. First li.add event listener, mouse out, and then our callback function. And we'll just do a first li.style.color and set it back to black, just like that. And if we refresh, you can see it goes green, and then we mouse out, it goes back to black, mouse over, green, and so on. So now we get this little hover effect that shows us what we're hovering over, basically which to do is selected. So now let's get this to work for every single li. It's just a few small changes that we need to do, and the first of them is we need to select all li's. So I'm going to change my variable to be var li's document.querySelector all li. So that gives us a list with the 3 li's. And then, of course, unfortunately, we can't just do this, li's.addEventListener. That doesn't work. We need to do a for loop. For var I equals 0, I less than li's dot length, I plus plus. And hopefully you're starting to feel a little more comfortable doing this, adding events or manipulating something inside of a loop where we select a bunch of them and then we loop through and we do something individually. Like I said a few videos ago, really common pattern, really important that we start to get comfortable with it. So inside of here, rather than doing first li.addEventListener, we're working with li's bracket I. So that's our individual li. And then I'm going to just copy this code. And there is a problem with this code. I mean, it will work, but it won't work in the way that we want it to. What will happen is we're adding an event listener to each li's I, but when we mouse over any of them, we're only changing first li.style.color. And actually it won't work because first li is not defined anymore. We changed the name. But that's not what we wanted anyways. We want it to be the li that was hovered over, that the mouse over event occurred on. So we can change this to the word this. Remember that the keyword this inside of an event listener refers to the item or the element that the event was triggered on. So this.style.color equals green, and then we'll just duplicate this code again, but instead of mouse over, we'll do a mouse out. And instead of going to green, we'll go back to black. And then we can get rid of this and refresh. And there we go. We have our nice little hover effect. So the last thing that I'll talk about is adding a click listener just to make this a little more complete. So same thing, li's I dot add event listener click, add our callback function, and what we're going to do here is use a class. So I'm going to just add the class first. It doesn't exist, but I'm going to say this dot class list dot, and we'll do toggle. This dot class list dot toggle, and we'll just call the class done. So the point is I can click on one of these and it should gray out and have a strike through effect. And even though I don't have a class done defined, it's still added. So I can show you that. Open up the console and let's inspect one of these. And then let's actually click on it. And you can see, I'll click on the first one. You can see, by the way, the color green and black changing over here as I hover. But as I click on this first one, you can see it adds class done. And then I click again and it goes away. So now we just need to define the class done. So let's do that now. I'll go over to Sublime and make a new file. And I'm going to save this as todos.css. And the first thing we do is define our class done. And I'm going to give it a strike through effect, which we do with text decoration. And we set that to be line through. And I'll also change the opacity. So opacity will be 0.5 and save. And then of course we need to link this todos.css to our HTML file with a link tag, todos.css, and we can save. And now let's test it out. We refresh the page, I hover, we still get our two events, changing the color, black and green, and now I can click, and we get a strike through effect and this line through as well. There are a few small changes I would make, however, if we go back to our JavaScript file. The first one is, rather than changing the color manually here, changing it to be green and black, I think it's still better to do it with our own class. So I'm going to make a new class, and I'm going to call this one .selected. And then I'm going to say when it's selected, text or color should be green, just like that. And then we'll go to the JavaScript, and when we mouse over, all we want to do is say this.classList.add selected. And this comes back to that separation of concerns idea, where we don't want our JavaScript manipulating individual styles. Rather, we can use JavaScript to turn on parts of our CSS, and the CSS will actually be in charge of the styling. So that will give it the class selected when we hover over, and when we leave, or when we mouse out, we'll do this.classList.remove selected. And if we save, refresh, you can see it looks pretty good. We click, we get our strike through. All right, there's a little to-do list. So this is a slightly nicer way of doing it. Functionally, it looks the same. It's just a better practice to use classes rather than adding and tweaking styles one at a time. So to sum up here, we saw 2 new events, mouse over and mouse out. And we also got some more practice setting up events inside of a loop where we use the this keyword.